Hello, and welcome to a Rodent's guide on the Vespid Stingwings in Kill Team 2024. This video will serve as a general introduction to the Vespid Stingwings kill team, as well as a specialist video for those that have played the team before. Like always, there will be timestamps in the description below to help you navigate this guide. It does include any changes to the team as a result of the first balanced data slate that dropped on 29 January 2025. My name is Mouse. Let's get into the video. The Vespids are making their appearance for the first time in Kill Team as the Vespid Stingwings, a 10-operative kill team featuring 4 different specialists, a unique leader, a standard warrior profile, and a supporting drone. These Vespids are a roughly insectoid Xenos race allied with the Tau Empire, originally from a gas giant planet aptly named Vespid. In Kill Team, they fly throughout the battlefield and rely on their basic instincts to drive them in combat, which the player will have to manage and plan for. Generally speaking, the only list building decision that players will have to make for this squad is whether to swap out one warrior for the flamethrower guy, but otherwise the list stays pretty much the same every time you take it. Luckily, the box comes with enough models to give you that choice, so there's no need to get a second box for this kill team. Before we talk operatives, let's run through the faction rules for the Vespid kill team. The main faction ability to keep track of is this team's communion point pool. Communion points are a secondary resource that players have to manage that allows you to do basic actions with your operatives who are otherwise driven by their innate instincts. You gain D3 communion points at the beginning of every turning point, plus 1 additional point if your oversight drone is still alive on the board. These points don't degrade or expire, so anything that you don't spend remains available for the rest of the game. You use these communion points to do the following things, which otherwise aren't available to your operatives. Number 1, whenever a friendly Vespid operative is performing the shoot action, it can only target the closest enemy operative within 8 inches of it, excluding enemy operatives that are within control range of other friendly Vespids, unless you spend 1 communion point to do this action. For weapons with the blast or torrent weapon rules, only the first target has the communion point cost requirement. Sadly, this rule doesn't say the closest valid enemy operative, which means that it's easy to end up having to pay for this, even though there's an enemy that is completely hidden to the shooter, but is technically closer, but behind a wall. I guess the prey drive for the Vespids are just that intense. You'll probably have plenty of communion points for this, but don't forget about saving some for shooting like this. Second, when a friendly Vespid operative is performing the charge action, it must end the action within control range of the closest enemy operative unless you spend 1 communion point. This is pretty self-explanatory, but it's a version of the shooting above. 3. Whenever you would perform the pickup marker or mission action, excluding operating a hatch, with a friendly Vespid operative, you must also spend 1 communion point in order to do so. This one hurts and is the primary thing that you'll make sure that you budget communion points for. You need to be doing mission actions, either as Tac Op actions or because of the crit op, if you want to win any of these games. So make sure that you keep enough around to be doing this each turning point. 4th, finally, when a friendly Vespid operative is shooting, you can spend 1 communion point, and only 1, to reroll one of your attack dice. 2 things to note here: you can't use this in melee combat, and you can't reroll more than 1 die using this per shooting sequence. After you've spent a few games understanding how to balance your communion point pool around the crit op and your tac op, you'll figure out how many points you can afford to burn trying to force through damage with this. Spoilers, you're going to need to be spending communion points in this way if you want to keep up your damage output. The second faction rule, which is easy to overlook, is neutron charge. A neutron weapon is anything that has a neutron in the name of any Vespid data card. Whenever a friendly Vespid operative moves or uses fly, its neutron weapons have the piercing 1 weapon rule until the end of the turning point. Note that it says the end of the turning point, so that if you get any counteractions for some reason, those shots will still have this benefit. The good news is that you're going to be using this every activation that you're shooting because the Vespids need the enemy to roll as few defense dice as possible. The bad news is that you're going to be using this by moving and then shooting, which oftentimes means that you have to leave your Vespid operatives in vulnerable positions in order for them to output any meaningful damage. The final faction rule is fly. Simply put, whenever a friendly Vespid operative performs an action in which it moves, it can choose to fly. If it does, don't move it. Instead, remove it from the kill zone and set it back up wholly within a distance equal to its move stat, or 3 inches if it was a dash, of its original location, measuring the horizontal distance only. There are a couple of notes here. 1, you can't fly through Gallowdark walls into the dark maps, and you also can't fly through hatchways on those maps. 2, if you perform a flying charge on someone, the friendly Vespid doesn't gain any additional movement like a typical charge. 3, at the end of the fly, the friendly Vespid must be set up in a location where it can legally be placed, and unless it's a charge, that means not within control range of an enemy operative. Pro tip, with the way that this rule is written, it currently means that you can fly through ceilings or floors without needing to go around them. You can easily fly directly into the bottom corner of a Volkis stronghold, for example, without needing to navigate climbing or dropping from valid positions. The verticality of the fly rule is what's going to help you control the battlefield as a Vespid player, so start looking for creative angles to hass your opponents from. Now let's take a look at the operatives available to the Vespid Stingwing team. The leader for the team is the Vespid Strain Leader. Like all operatives on the squad, he is a 2 APL operative with a 5-up armor save and a 6-inch movement stat. The leader has 10 wounds compared to the standard 9 for everyone else, and comes with an upgraded neutron blaster weapon. They also have 2 abilities, Communion Helm and Commune. The Communion Helm allows you to spend 1 communion point for free during each of this operative's activations, and Commune states whenever you are selecting operatives for the battle, also select 1 Vespid Stingwing strategy ploy. Whenever this operative is in the kill zone and not within control range of enemy operatives, that ploy costs you 0 command points. This is some great command point economy, so make sure that you are picking a ploy that you are going to want to have active all the time. We'll talk about ones where this makes the most sense once we get to that section. Because of the 2 abilities for this operative, this one is often going to hang out at the backline for the team and do the boring work of babysitting the home objective and or doing Tac Ops actions to score you points and stay safe for as long as possible. They have better than average shooting for the team, but don't throw away their utility value early just because their shooting isn't that much better. The supporting drone for the Vespid team is the Oversight drone. This little guy is rocking an 8-inch movement stat and a 2-up armor save, but only 5 wounds. They have no shooting profile and a terrible melee profile, with the restrictions of only being able to perform basic movement actions, fights, and their aerial guidance ability. Aerial guidance is a 1 AP action that creates a buff aura around the drone that lasts until their next activation. Whenever a friendly Vespid operative is visible to and within 6 of this operative, and shooting an enemy operative that is also visible to this operative, that friendly operative's weapons have the lethal 5-up and saturate weapon rules. This has no effect while the operative is within control range of an enemy operative, and this ability recently was buffed in a balance update, and the updated version is the one that's described here. This updated version adds some nice firepower to the squad, but it can be hard to effectively position since the drone is pretty small and sometimes has trouble physically seeing around terrain on the battlefield. It also benefits nicely from the comms device general equipment, which extends the range of this buff out to 9 inches from the drone. Depending on the map, that can cover like 2/3 of the relevant places to be, so consider that as an option for this guy. Also, before we move on from the drone, note that the evasion drone characteristics also grant the drone super conceal, which means it's unable to be targeted if it's in cover by anything if it has a conceal order unless the enemy targeting them is within 2 inches, and that the drone ignores the piercing weapon rule from all sources. This little guy can be really hard for your opponent to nail down, so just make sure that you keep them out of blast range so he doesn't get picked off by targeting one of your Vespids. The first specialist we're going to talk about is the Long Sting, which is the dedicated sniper for the Vespids. They have a standard profile and an aimed profile for the rail rifle, with the main difference being that the aimed profile hits on 3s and has lethal 5-up, but has the heavy dash restriction. The main usage of this operative is to get them into spots where they are able to dash and take their shots, since your opponent is unlikely to let you truly stand still, and you want to be getting your neutron charge active anyway. The Long Sting's weapon also has the neutron fragment keyword, which leaves radioactive shrapnel in targets that aren't incapacitated from this operative's shooting attacks, but are dealt damage from their attack dice. In the ready step of each strategy phase, separately inflict D3 damage on each operative for each neutron fragment token that they are affected by. This is a good way to chip through some extra damage on tough targets, but because it doesn't trigger until the start of each turning point, it will still mean that your opponent can counteract with their models without running the risk of dying first. Although the first inclination is to use this operative like a traditional sniper and hide them on a vantage point until they get their perfect shot, I've actually found some success using him more like a plasma gunner from last edition. With a 4/4 damage profile backed by lethal 5, devastating 2, piercing 1, and a handful of rerolls, this operative is the best single target damage option for the team. Don't just sit him somewhere passively, try to maneuver him so that he can proactively handle one of your opponent's big threats instead. The Shade Strain is a unique operative on the Vespid team. Like the Oversight Drone, they have an improved armor save, this time on 3s, and they ignore the piercing weapon rule for as long as they are the primary target because of their camouflaged rule. They also have a special type of Super Conceal if they are further than 6 inches from the shooting operative, but this version makes them not a valid target at all, cover or not. Ghost Rig allows this guy to literally stand in the open and be untargetable for all cases unless the shooter is within range. The Shade Strain also comes with a neutron grenade for a 2-inch blast threat, but otherwise the grenade has nearly an identical profile to the standard Vespid blaster, so don't bother using the grenade on a single target unless you are really worried about having saturate. The Sky Blast is the other AoE specialist for the Vespids, carrying a neutron grenade launcher with the neutron bombardment keyword. Neutron bombardment allows you to place a neutron fallout marker within your primary target's control range every time you shoot with this weapon. Once during each of your enemy operatives' activations, as soon as it is within 2 inches of your fallout marker, inflict D3 damage on that operative, but multiple markers are not cumulative. This is a nice additional effect to help chip down enemy operatives, but be careful not to overcommit for getting a good fallout marker placement, because I've definitely been guilty of throwing this model out into the open too early just because I saw a great angle for a fallout token, and it ultimately didn't end up doing that much damage throughout the game. Dealing D3 damage at a time only averages 2 damage per tick, which may matter in some matchups and won't matter in others. Another AoE blast option for the team is always welcome, especially one that comes with piercing 1, so a key to victory is getting this operative a shot that hits 2 or more targets to ramp up the number of dice that we're putting down range. The final specialist option is the Swarm Guard, who sometimes doesn't make the final cut for deployment. This operative is our Flamer, which is another pseudo AoE option for the team, and does bring a nice shooting profile of 4 attacks, hitting on 2s with 3/3 damage. It's not a neutron weapon, however, so we lose that piercing 1, and it doesn't come with devastating wounds. This is another good option into horde teams, and some mid-range ones, but teams with good armor saves make this guy feel really lackluster. It also has a niche ability called Sky Torch, which is thematically awesome, where the Swarm Guard flies overhead and burns everyone beneath them as they do so. It can line up some pretty interesting shots since it has fly, but since you're using fly, it means it can only travel 6 inches horizontally. In order to be eligible for those shooting actions, you have to start at least 1 inch away from your targets to be outside of melee range, and then you have to end outside of 1 inch on the other side too for the same reason. This ultimately doesn't leave a ton of space underneath you to be able to tag very many other operatives, but if you can line it up, it does great. Regardless, the standard torrent option does just fine by itself if you are hitting 9 wound or less enemies that save on 5s. If they are saving on better than 5s or have more than 9 wounds, you'll feel the swinginess of this more than you'd like. The standard warrior chassis for the Vespids looks the same as most of what we've been seeing so far. 4 attacks, hitting on 4s with 3/3 damage and devastating 2. Although this seems a touch weak on paper, just remember that you'll probably have piercing 1 and several rerolls available each time. Plus, each warrior has the Warrior Instincts ability, which gives you accurate 1 on every shooting attack as long as you don't spend any communion points during that sequence. It isn't great, and you'll have plenty of times where you hit basically nothing at all, but there are also times where the damage output is noticeable. Just don't leave home without those other shooting buffs. With the operatives in the back of our mind, we can now take a look at the strategic and firefight ploys available to the team. Hardened Exoskeleton gives friendly Vespids, excluding the Oversight Drone, some damage reduction in melee combat, reducing normal damage of 4 or more by 1 point each time damage is received. This is helpful against a fair number of melee weapons, but it doesn't apply to critical strikes. This doesn't turn the Vespids into melee monsters, but it does help them change their melee math breakpoints in certain matchups. Aerial Agility states that whenever an operative is shooting a friendly Vespid operative while counteracting or during an activation in which that shooting operative moved or was set up, roll 1d6 whenever an attack die would inflict normal damage. On a 5-up, ignore that inflicted damage. A maximum of 1 attack die can be ignored per shooting sequence in this way. Remember how I talked about the Vespid leader picking a strategic ploy that you're going to want to have active all the time? This is a good contender for that if you're playing against an opponent who wants to be shooting you all the time. This goes a long way to increasing survivability for this team, but there will be games where it just never seems to trigger. Airborne Predators is another bread and butter strategic ploy for the Vespids. Whenever a friendly Vespid moves or uses fly during its activation, its weapons have the balanced rule until the end of that activation. Although it doesn't work when you are counteracting or retaliating, if a Vespid is on offense in any way, this is good to have. Vespid players are definitely going to want this to be active every turning point, and this is my personal choice for the free ploy from the Vespid Strain Leader. You'll want to be moving before every shooting action anyway because it triggers neutron charge, so this only improves our damage output. You'll re-roll a lot of dice between this ploy using communion points and the occasional command point. Sting is the final strategic ploy for the team, and it grants friendly Vespid operatives Claws the lethal 5-up and shock weapon rules. I haven't found much success with the Vespids in melee combat because they only have 3 attack dice, but if you're paired into another team with subpar melee stats, this ploy can help you bully them. Dedicated melee operatives from other teams are still likely to really punish a Vespid in melee, so be careful. This ploy just gives Vespids a bit of a chance. Moving now into the Firefight ploys, the first is Ocelli. Use this Firefight ploy whenever a friendly Vespid operative performs the shoot action during an activation in which it's used fly. Until the end of that action, it gains all the benefits from the first and second main features of Vantage Terrain. When determining the height difference between operatives for Vantage Terrain rules, treat that friendly operative as being 3 inches higher than it currently is, but not for determining the distance for Communion. Although this ploy seems great, remember that these benefits from Vantage only apply if the target of the shooting attack is on an engage order. If the target is on Conceal, you won't retain any dice as a result of the accurate weapon rule. However, if you manage to target an operative on Engage, the benefits apply to every target in the shooting action, including secondary targets, which is excellent value for the ploy. Also, this will stack with Accurate 1 from Warriors who are benefiting from their Warrior Instincts ability, up to a maximum of Accurate 2. Sadly, there is no Accurate 3. The next Firefight ploy is Darting Flight, which can be used when a friendly Vespid operative performs the reposition action. Until the end of that action, it can move an additional D3 or be set up an additional D3 inches away if it uses fly. In either case, it cannot perform the shoot or fight actions for the rest of the turning point. This is a great utility piece for the squad. Just remember that they can't start any violence themselves for the turn afterwards. It is a good way to get an operative into that one critical position or make sure that they are ready for the next turn. Also, the operative in question can still do things like mission actions, so it helps you a lot if you've accidentally moved just out of range to tap an objective or perform a Tac Op action like plant beacons. Neutron Overload is a Firefight ploy that deals D3 additional damage to a target within 4 inches if a friendly Vespid operative is shooting with a neutron weapon and resolving a critical success against that target. Because of how hard it can be to actually get dice to resolve, this ploy can help you get that little bit of extra damage across to finish off a target. On average, this ploy does 2 damage to the target, but if it hits that important breakpoint on the target or secures a kill, it can be well worth the CP. Finally, the Vespids have Vicious Venom, which similarly deals D3 additional damage to a target when you are fighting with a Vespid operative, excluding the Oversight Drone, and you strike with a critical success. For all the same points as Neutron Overload, this can be helpful in a pinch. Since it is in melee combat, however, it's just inherently riskier for this team to pull off, and you'll probably use it a lot less. Just don't forget about it because it might really matter. Okay, let's talk equipment. And this team actually loves their faction-specific options. Neurostimulant allows you to roll 2d3 instead of 1d3 for your communion points each turning point, and you select which d3 you would like to use. Back when communion points used to reset each turning point, this was an auto take every game, but now I've actually been considering dropping it in some matchups where other pieces of equipment are really important. As a general rule, however, you can't go wrong with this selection, and more communion points is never a bad thing. If you want to be extra specific, this adds an average of just below 1/2 a communion point per turning point, or just about 2 communion points per game. Convergence Stimulant gives you a once per turning point ability to perform the pickup marker or mission action without having to spend a communion point to do so. Unlike the Neurostimulant, you're always going to want to have this because there's always something during the game where you can get value out of this. Again, however, we can measure this with respect to communion point value, and this one is always going to be equal to 3 communion points per game unless you forget to use it. Accelerant Stimulant, as the name implies, increases the movement capabilities of friendly Vespid operatives, excluding the Oversight drone. Whenever one of these friendly Vespids performs the charge or dash action, they can move an additional 1 inch. If it uses fly for this action, you can set that operative up 1 inch further away. Although this doesn't seem like much, since it doesn't apply to the reposition action, it is great for turning point 1, where you're usually doing repositions and dashes to advance up the board. And it's also very helpful for the long sting, whose aimed profile has the heavy dash restriction. And it's also helpful for anyone trying to make a flying charge, since the Vespids don't otherwise get a distance increase for their charges when they're flying. At first it seems like an incredible piece of equipment, but even after considering some of the restrictions, it is still a good option. I don't think I'd ever skip over this one personally. Aggression Stimulant is the final faction equipment choice, and it gives an upgrade to the melee for friendly Vespid operatives, excluding the Oversight drone, giving them ceaseless whenever they are fighting, but not retaliating. This is helpful when combined with some of the other melee-focused ploys for the Vespid team, but again, we are limited because we only have 3 attacks in melee. You can decently bully other teams that also only have 3 attack dice, and can sort of hold your own against teams with 4 attack dice, but dedicated melee specialists or operatives with 5 attack dice are still going to ruin your day in melee combat. This is the first faction-specific equipment that I regularly find myself dropping in favor of some of the universal equipment options. Speaking of universal equipment, a selection like the comms device can be used to great effect when paired with the buffing aura of the Oversight drone to affect a 9-inch radius from the unit that can fly and has super conceal. Helps make this little guy a lot more impactful, but it does telegraph where you're going to be focusing your efforts when you place this equipment. Sometimes that won't really change things, so I'd get used to scouting maps for smart placements of this. Other universal equipment picks like razor wire or smoke grenades can be useful pickups as well. I personally love razor wire, as you've probably figured out from watching this channel, and smoke grenades can be useful in a pinch if you're fighting against a team who can't ignore obscuring. Just remember that you never have to bother with ladders, since every operative on this team can fly. The Vespid Stingwings were one of the 2 teams included in the Hivestorm box to kick off Kill Team's new edition. They have some absolutely beautiful models, and some really interesting ways to play the game, which can be a fun way to mentally exercise your brain as you problem solve in new ways. The team is definitely not a super-powered one though, so you're going to have to work hard to get your wins in most of your games. This team, because of the unique way that it maneuvers around the board, will pose more of a challenge if you aren't familiar with seeing them on the tabletop, but players with experience facing them will have a better time. That's not exactly unique to this team, but the edge that this team gets from an experience gap is often one of the bigger things that contributes to their victories. If you pick this team up yourself, give yourself a half dozen games to experiment and try new things out, and try not to get too frustrated when things don't seem to click just right. Also, keep track of your dice to figure out if you really did make a bad play, or if your dice just didn't cooperate. I don't like complaining about having dice decide your games, but this team is more susceptible to that than most because it's hitting on 4s and has some swinging outcomes. This team is primarily a team that likes to shoot instead of fight, and primarily consists of single rounds of shooting with 4 attacks and hitting on 4s. Those stats by themselves are not good enough to win you games, so you need to make sure that you're making use of other mechanics and buffs for the team to get there. The first and largest playstyle shift that this team requires is making sure that we're always moving and then shooting with our Vespids. Even if you just move in place, make sure you perform a reposition or dash before you take your shots. This sequencing will activate Neutron Charge, and grant us Piercing 1, and will trigger Airborne Predators if you have that ploy active, giving us Balanced. That right there is a significant upgrade for us to push damage through, but there are more layers available. If you're a warrior, try to position your operative so that the warrior instincts kick in and grant them Accurate 1 for the attack. You can't miss with a die that you automatically get to retain. If you aren't shooting with a warrior or can't use their warrior instincts, don't forget to spend communion points on single rerolls for attacks as well. This is specifically not called balance, so it stacks with the balanced rerolls that you get from Airborne Predators, and it will further stack with command point rerolls if you need even more help. Don't go too crazy though, and make sure that you understand how likely you are to push damage through onto your opponent. But you should almost always be re-rolling for that 4th hit if you've already secured 3 successes, unless you know the target is going to die. Speaking of understanding your opponent, make sure that you have your big AoE operatives in positions to catch your opponent when they bunch up in staging. Operatives like the Shade Strain, Skyblast, and Swarm Guard are all ways to improve our offensive output if we can tag multiple enemy operatives with a single shooting action. Even if we can't actually land a shot on multiple targets, the threat of doing so will often force our opponents to position in weird ways or prevent them from moving up the board like they want to, which gets value in its own right. Like I mentioned vaguely earlier, the Vespid Stingwings are kind of vulnerable to the team that's across the table. Sometimes they can do their own thing just fine, and sometimes they have several Tac Ops strategies that they can pursue to leverage their strengths. Other times, however, they just get kind of brickwalled by opponents with good armor saves or reliable melee, let alone both. Just because this team has fly and access to plant beacons, you'd automatically jump to wanting that strategy in almost every game, right? Well, give it a test drive and don't be afraid to try something else. I personally have a hard time using plant beacons with this team for a couple of reasons. Number 1, this team is a mid-range team of 10 operatives, but only 9 of those operatives can actually plant beacons. 2, since this team is made up of only 2 APL members with no access to any kind of APL comms buff, if this team spends time planting beacons, it means that it only has 7 operatives available to play the rest of the game. That puts this team closely in line with powerful elite teams, but this team just doesn't have the same level of firepower to those teams when trimmed down in this way. It's just my 2 cents. You'll have to experiment on your own and find the best playstyle that works for you. I like Confirm Kill because it streamlines the aspects of the game that I have to focus on while managing my pool of communion points and flying operatives. I mentioned that the team is made up of 2 APL operatives and doesn't have any comms buffs for additional APL. They also can't ignore changes to their APL, which means things like stun grenades and the shock or stun weapon keywords are very difficult for this team to handle. I'd mentioned that they'd also have trouble falling back from melee combat for the same reason, but truthfully, they're probably just going to die in melee before they can even do that. Their other big weakness is that they're pretty fragile in melee, despite having a number of buffs that they can use to enhance themselves. In my opinion, this is entirely due to the fact that they only have 3 attacks with their claws, despite having some damage reduction, a good wound pool, 3-4 damage on their melee, and a host of weapon keywords if they want them. Having only 3 attacks in melee is just never going to be viable, and therefore the Vespids want to stay away from melee combat, except when they're finishing off a wounded target in a single strike. In Kill Team 24, the Vespid Stingwings are a unique team of Tau-affiliated specialist shock troops that deploy from the sky and use their flying abilities to confound opponents and dispatch them in the chaos. There are several flavorful specialists on the squad, and a mix of warriors to flesh out the roster. I wouldn't recommend that a player starts their kill team journey with this team, but I do think that they're a fun one to pick up and challenge yourself with. I don't see them winning any major tournaments because they just don't have that consistency, but that doesn't mean that you can't have good games with them. The models for the team are also just excellently sculpted, so I'm happy to have built them and taken them to the tabletop. They're also a team that is fun to play against, so you'll never have a feels bad moment about repping these guys at a local game night if you catch somebody completely off guard when they're facing Vespids for their first time. And that will wrap up our introduction to the Vespid Stingwings team in Kill Team 24. If you've made it this far into the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss out on our future other guides as well. The Vespids are a pretty underrepresented team, so if you have any tips or tricks that you like to use, please leave them in the comment section so that others can try them out as well. More guides like this one are coming soon, so stay tuned and let me hear your requests. Until next time, have fun and be good if you want to.